Moving on, you mentioned organ transplants and organ donations. One of the things that came up over the past couple years, and one of the investigations that Mr. Fishman was involved in, was all of a sudden there was a routine money laundering investigation. Next thing you know, you come across someone brokering and trafficking organs. Now, the issue you raised is we have an organ shortage in this country. People die every day waiting on waiting lists for organs. And one of the elements in the law today is that a donor of an organ, living organ, kidneys, for example, is not allowed to be compensated for that organ. And the argument is made, it's made in other countries, that maybe they should. Maybe we should allow people to be compensated. And part of the argument is that if you think of a kidney transplant, and many of us know people that have received them, have given them, it's a wonderful thing. Altruistic kidney donors are doing one of the greatest mitzvahs in the world. If you think of that arrangement, the doctor doing the procedure is making money off of the procedure. The corporate counsel in the hospital is making money off of that procedure. The hospital is making money. Everyone in the process is benefiting from that kidney financially, except for the recipient who's receiving a new kidney. The only person in the entire arrangement that's not allowed to be compensated is the donor. The argument is made that if we allowed people to be compensated for organs, there'd be a lot more organs available. Is that a good idea or not? Doctor?
So in looking at the issue of trafficking, money comes up, and let's hold on the American situation for a second. What you do see internationally is desperately poor people are used as the sellers, and they get no medical care, they have no advocate, people remove their kidney and ditch them. So they are left usually worse off than they started, even though they get paid. The people who are paid have no job, have no ability to earn any money, so they may relieve some debt or they may have a temporary increase in their standard of living. But what we saw again and again in sort of interviewing in India, Philippines, Brazil, Egypt, lots of places, Moldova, is that you're exploiting people. There's no doubt that it's raw exploitation, not enough money is spent. And by the way, the other gimmick that the middlemen uses, they charge them for their airfare, their housing, their food, and everything else. So many of them come away with nothing. They're not nice guys in the sort of middleman trade. So internationally, I think markets do not work. They are under the table. Interpol tries to police them. All governments around the world have condemned them. So is the Transplant Society. You don't make people better off that way. Could you run a market in kidneys? Remember, it doesn't help your livers and hearts and faces in the US. Could you do it here? And I'll tell you, I have mixed feelings about that. One is, I think, I'll just mention two reasons, then we can discuss this. Not that I don't have any passion about it. The first is, when you look at motives to lie about your health, money is the motive. Many years ago, we banned whole blood sale because we were in the midst of a hepatitis epidemic that we couldn't control. As soon as we stopped sale, and moved to altruistic blood donation, hepatitis rates fell by almost 90%. When you pay, you give somebody a reason to lie. We see it, by the way, even in paid sperm donation. People lie about their sex history, and we get into communicable disease and genetic problems with paid sperm. Second big issue, whether I like it or you like it, there are many religions in the US that oppose markets. Catholic Church does, many popes have spoken out against it, so have evangelicals. If you want to have another abortion debate, create a market in kidneys.
Rabbi?
I think the Jewish tradition distinguishes between three kinds of sales. There's sales of body parts that naturally regenerate, like blood or hair or perhaps even skin. And there are body parts that you have only one of that if you lose, you will die, like your heart. And then there are things like unique things like a kidney that you have two of that you can live with only one of. I think we're all pretty comfortable with the idea in theory of blood sales. There are technical problems that you mentioned, very serious technical problems, but these are not grand philosophical problems. The Jewish tradition wholeheartedly recognizes that financial incentives seem pretty reasonable to encourage blood donations. So too, the reverse is true when it comes to hearts. You can't sell your heart to save somebody else. No matter how much money comes to your heirs, you're just not allowed to kill yourself to benefit somebody else. You're just not allowed to. It goes back to euthanasia. We don't murder people to save other people other than in the most rare and unusual situations. Kidneys are complicated. You have 2 of them, not 57 of them, only 2, but you really only need 1 of them, at least typically. It's not unreasonable to think that the Jewish tradition would allow a donor to be something other than altruistic in the sale of a kidney. After all, encouraging people to do the right thing is an ancient part of the Jewish tradition. I don't mean to diminish the practical problems that you raised. The practical problems are very serious. It might be, after a tight look, you see that the introduction of money, while in theory a good idea, doesn't work in practice. But we've also never tried it in the United States, which is a more sophisticated economy than, let's say, Thailand or India or Bulgaria, where there's a very serious problem of nominal sales by nefarious middlemen. A regulated market in the United States in which kidney donors are fairly compensated, subject to governmental regulation, might dramatically increase the supply of kidneys. And the Jewish tradition wouldn't look in a nefarious way at the decision to not donate a kidney, but sell a kidney to a person in need. It might be that you're right. It's actually a bad idea.
It might be that I'm right.
It only might be that you're right. During the 10 days of awe, we can modify it with the word might. The other 350 days of the year, I'll only say you're always
Sort
right.
of right.
I understand, but it seems to me that clinical experiment might be worth doing. We should divide the country at the Mississippi.
We're already divided as a country.
At the
That's already
Mississippi.
happened.
At the Mississippi, probably.
At the Mississippi, and let half the states on one side of the Mississippi conduct organ donation sales and see what happens.
Let me jump in here with 2 other comments. Sorry to interrupt, but one is, if you're a living donor of a kidney, you wind up with expenses. One area people can agree, I think, with respect to money and organs, is that you shouldn't wind up in debt because you did a good thing and gave a kidney or a piece of your liver to somebody, yet that is the case. So we are not making, sorry for the bad pun, whole people who give up voluntarily to relatives or sometimes strangers. That's an area where I think compensation should be tried. I've been arguing for that this year a lot and in many venues, and I think that's a modest experiment on that road. The other is, remember, there's another option. There's presumed consent or default to donation, which I've been arguing for about 40 years. And that basically says, instead of making you carry a card that says, I want to be an organ donor, you carry a card that says, I don't want to be an organ donor. It's just shifting the presumption. Since most polls show 70 to 80% of Americans say they want to be organ donors, why don't we presume that that's what you want to be and put the burden on those who don't want to do it?
30 seconds.
I have no problem with shifting the presumption, but that essentially deals with cardiac donations. It deals with donations from the deceased.
No, everything. You can do everything.
Right, but presumably
cadaver.
with cadaver,
Yes.
but
Cadaver, yes.
donations. But presumably, what we're talking about in kidneys is live donations from family members who love you enough only that they'll sell you a kidney.
Francine,
I have family like that.
I
But
think we all do.
there's a halfway point here. Compensation doesn't have to take the form of cash. There are in-kind types of compensation, and the question then becomes, what is an acceptable material value? What is going to incentivize a person? The reality is that every day 20 people die waiting for an organ in this country. And we've been talking about this problem for 40 years. I wrote a paper on this in law school 20 plus years ago. So this is an age-old problem, and we're not getting that much better. So there are other types of compensation that have been talked about. Tax credits on state income taxes for the travel, lodging, and lost wages related to the donation process with live donors. Live donors report that they have problems securing life insurance after they've donated. They sometimes face increased
By the
premiums
way,
in
it
their
was
health
a
insurance.
pre-existing condition
Yes.
that would have been excluded had Obamacare followed.
Exactly. So there's other ways to address the problem rather than with cash. And these are very real problems with live donors that really should be addressed. Like you said, these people need to be made whole for doing an altruistic deed.
Francine, let me just ask you a question, because as a corporate counsel in a hospital, you dealt with contracts. imagine someone's going to go ahead and they make a private arrangement to have an altruistic donation for money on the side, right? It's all altruistic, but somehow or other, there's a suitcase involved, but they want a contract that they're going to go through with this procedure. So they come to you, your attorney, and they say, I have a contract I wrote up where so-and-so is going to give me X amount of money. I'm going to give them a kidney. I want you to look over the contract and make sure that it's legal. I presume you're not allowed to do that, correct? Because that would be
Correct.
abetting a
First of all,
crime.
as corporate counsel, I definitely wouldn't be allowed, but
Right,
even an
definitely.
attorney
But
in
any
private
attorney wouldn't be allowed
practice,
to do
right.
that. The question is, do you now have an obligation to go and report this person? Last year, we talked about attorney-client privilege. Here is someone that's about to commit a crime. So you have an obligation to take your client to the police or to Mr. Fishman and say, this person is about to sign a contract where they're going to be compensated or give compensation to receive an organ.
So I think that that is a very challenging question, and there's certainly a continuum of what point do you cross the attorney-client privilege. But with the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege, I think that if it is imminent that this person has come with the contract and with the suitcase of money and says, we're lined up to go to China next week to do this, I just need you to make sure the contract protects me. I think, yes, that it would be appropriate at that point to say that the attorney-client privilege does not protect that situation.
Professor of law, Rabbi Broyce.
There's a hard question here because in the United States, these contracts are illegal, but such surgery wouldn't be done in the United States. When somebody asks me to look at a contract for a medical procedure done overseas, I'm not really sure that this is even a violation of American law here. They're engaging in an overseas transaction that I'm going to assume is lawful in China. The fact that it violates the law in the United States might not be my problem, and it might not be a violation of American law in any way, shape, or form. The problem that you hinted at, or you didn't hint at, that you spoke about, which is clients going overseas to engage in medical transactions that are crimes in the United States, is not well addressed in American law. My duties as an attorney reviewing a contract for a medical procedure that's a crime in the United States and perfectly legal in India, I have no idea what the right answer is. Somebody needs to investigate this more. I'm not sure that I'm under any obligation to not facilitate a client from engaging in lawful activity in India. When they're in India, that's a crime in the United States.
We're going to pause that right there.